And we're back with you. Again, I'm Brock Thompson with Onyx Realty Professionals, and we're back here with
Dana Brown. I'm with CBM Mortgage.
And we're coming to you again. We're picking back up where we left off. You know, we kind of talked about budgeting in the last round, and now today we're going to talk about what it takes and possibly looking like downsizing and what that means for both of us from the real estate and what we can do to help, and also from the lending side. So Dana, what do you see? You know, we talked about the budgeting and trying to figure out that side of it. When we talk about this time with downsizing, what does that mean, and what are you kind of helping clients figure out when we start to talk to them?
Sure. So as we're going through divorcing in real estate, you know, a lot of times we're talking about selling the marital home.
Yep.
We're then on your end going to figure out how much that home is worth. And we're looking at downgrading into a one-person household, and that's where we come in with the budgeting, figure out how much they can afford, and so that's what it means to downsize. Okay. If that's what they're doing, maybe they're upsizing.
Yeah, it could be both ways. You never know.
Maybe they found the next spouse already.
Yeah, it's a good throw. We joke about it, but we're really here to also to be helpful, and we just kind of see different perspectives. We never know what the clients are going through, what it is there. You know, and that's where, as a real estate professional, we're coming in to try to help with that equity. Right. Because way too often I find out, you know, people have looked on Zillow and they found, oh, well, I saw my house is worth $500,000, and I run the numbers. I'm like, either it may be more, it may be less. But what they really don't understand is what equity is in a house. They just see like, well, I think I owe this much, and this is how much is, you know, what's my payoff. But there's a lot of things that kind of go into this, and you know, you and I have both seen it when we talk to clients. They didn't realize really what other expenses may be coming up that they didn't know about. So when we kind of come in from the real estate side of it, and the equity is important because we really want to tell them this is what you're walking away with, because that's truly, you know, when you go through a divorce, you may be splitting that equity. So even though you thought, oh, I have $80,000 of equity, well, after expenses and after fees and things of, you know, even taxes, depending on how long you've lived in the house, that equity may only be $40,000, and you really may be splitting it with your spouse, depending on what is the situation and what divorce decree we have. So from my side, it's really nice to have you to be able to, when I bounce it off and say, hey, we're really considering, and either you are maybe upsizing or downsizing. Well, what does that look like for affordability? Because now I need to tell them like, hey, you may be taking that 20 grand that you left over and using it as a down payment. Do we need to have this house sold before, or what is liquid in your accounts? And so kind of when you're talking about the budget in the last one, I think that's so important to start there, because if they don't know what their life cost, and many times we don't, most Americans don't know what their life costs. Most people don't. They literally look at bank statements at the end of the month. Do I have enough to pay? They don't really look at where their money's going. And so when we kind of come into this now, we're having to learn, how do you look at money? Because we don't know how they were looking at it. And now with the equity side, it's really important to see that piece of it. And I enjoy explaining to clients, it's quite often a shocker of how much less equity is actually there than what they thought. But it helps me to tell them when we're going to the next step, when I'm bringing them over to you and saying, hey, now we found out around this much equity is in the house. And I present it to you. Now they can decide maybe they are upsizing or downsizing based off of that, on what they need to do. So when I come to you, tell them, hey, you may have 20,000. What are you looking at to see if they may or may not need to sell that house? What kind of things are giving you indications, so then I can either tell them like, you really do need to sell the house before we can get that money, or you're in a position to purchase a house non-contingent, meaning you don't need it to sell the house first. What kind of things do you see that we need to be aware of that we could kind of express to them?
Yeah, so most of the time, and this goes back to the budget conversation we did in the last segment, most of the time when we are downsizing, if that marital home was a 2-income household, most of the time they're going to have to sell. Yes. And a lot of times, whatever you're figuring out the equity profit is going to help me piece together what they can afford for the next one. If they need a down payment, if they don't, and how that equity is going to play into that. You know, and just to kind of to back up, like we talked about in the last segment, it's so hard and this very emotional process to sit down and wrap your mind around
Yeah.
what you have, and to get in front of professionals to figure out, what is my marital asset worth? How can I help this marital asset and the equity in my transition of affordability? And it's so emotional. Divorce is so expensive. And so a lot of times people forget to really sit down and budget and look into the assets they already have, which is their equity. And you don't want to miss that step. You know, it's embarrassing to talk to people and make this very emotional transition into, you make it about business, but it really is so helpful. I mean, I personally went through a divorce, and the first thing that I did when I walked into several divorce attorneys, that they immediately said, what does Zillow say your property's worth? And they started doing a calculation on how much I am going to have to split with my ex. And the reality is you need to sit down and talk with professionals and let them talk to you about what your equity really is. And that's where you come into play, because, you know, this online information is not accurate. And then the cost of fees associating it, because it's not just what you think your house is worth. And a lot of times, because divorce is so expensive with the divorce attorneys, people forego talking to the professionals. And they've just made side deals on equity and they don't even really know what they're giving up, or what so that they can really transition. So I think, in a perfect world, if I could counsel everyone who's going through divorce, I would sit down before I started taking these steps to even sign on the dotted line and figure out, what are my marital assets worth? What can I gain from this marital asset? What does my budget look like as affordability as I go into this transition on my own? Because I can promise you, you will negotiate different with your divorce attorney when you know what your financial ability is with the equity you've earned, and what your affordability is with me once you've looked at your income and your budget on your own.
Yeah, and I think what you said there, I mean, really having knowledge of your own, what do you control at that point? Because you know, so often I have talked with real estate attorneys, and immediately that's exactly where they go. They go, Zillow, this is it. And then they start going from there. And I'm like, well, why do you go there? Because if you don't know the backstory of truly what they have, assets, what other liens may be on properties that they have no idea about. And they're assuming, well, you have this much and this is how much you're going to split. But what about those other pieces?
Who else is on title?
Who's on title? Because, you know, especially now, we've gone through COVID and all those things, there's people on title that you didn't even know. Like grandma might be on title because she was, you know, that's the co-signer to help you get something there. It's not as cut and dry as sometimes when they're, you know, the attorneys. And that's why, you know, we're working now too, and we'll try to get some attorneys on the show with us, because we want them to kind of give you their perspective as well. But when we're talking just between the lender and you're an agent, that's so important, because that step gets skipped. And when you go in to talk to your attorney, you really want to know what you have. And it's such an emotional time. And so carrying people that can look at it logically, when sometimes it is like you can't always wrap your mind around it. And we've had clients that have no idea where they're going with things, and they're sitting down and talking to us, and I'm like, whoa, we got to back up a step. Where are we at? And sometimes it's a couple months that actually we'll be counseling a client before we ever get to actually meeting with Dana, or, you know, us really coming down to it, because I want to find out what is truly the bigger picture. So then I can say, hey, when you meet with your attorney, this is what you really need to tell them, not just, this is how much my house is worth, assuming what it's worth. And so that's kind of where we're going. And each time we kind of meet with you guys and just going to go through a different topic, we want to really express how much caring and building a team around you when it's an emotional time, when you're kind of going to be all over the place because you had so many things to figure out with between your family, if you have children, anything else. There's so many pieces to that puzzle that if you have somebody that can look at it logically and kind of remove themselves from one step and kind of give you a better high view of everything, it will actually help you in the long run decide what's best for you, for your family, and for those around you. So again, I'm Brock Thompson with Onyx Realty Professionals, here with Dana Brown at CBM Mortgage. We're here for you. We'll have our name, numbers, and this. If you ever want to reach out to us, please do. We're here for us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next segment.